world record. Uh-oh, hang on. And then the third one was 2011-12 eastbound, because a lot of people go eastbound and I couldn't understand why. So I decided to try it myself, visit countries that I hadn't seen on the other ones, and have a good time. And all these were to raise funds for ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. So I'll tell you a little bit about Lou Gehrig's disease and a lot about flying. And yes, please, if you have questions, please unmute yourself and ask the questions, when it's hot, because other people might have the similar question. Okay. So that's the Mooney I still fly that's in my hangar in Moriarty. A Mooney is a very efficient plane, and I already had it before I decided to do this. But as I said, my mother died of ALS in 2002, and then I planned to fly around, well, because of that, and to raise funds for ALS, and to get my dad reunited with his sister who lived in New Zealand, and she'd lost her husband. My dad had just lost his wife, and they were both in their 60s, 70s, wanted to get back together. So we got him there commercially. I flew the plane there because he'd passed his love of aviation on to me. And so I wanted to fly him around New Zealand and then fly him across to Australia, then send him back to the States. And I didn't want to cross the Pacific twice. So I figured out how to get around the rest of the world. And anyway, that's how the flight got started. Those are the statistics on the flight. This is what the Mooney looked like when it was fully tanked. So the two back seats were taken out, and that's a 55-gallon drum lying on its side in place of the two rear seats. And then the right seat is taken out, and that's a 17-gallon drum. So everything is plumbed together. I had the Monroy STC, so I had 100 gallons in the wings, and that gave me enough endurance. The longest leg in the world is from California to Hawaii. It's over 2,000 nautical miles. So that gave me enough endurance to get to Hawaii. If you can get to Hawaii, you can get anywhere else. So once everything's in the plane, here's the tank that you saw before with a non-skid surface on it. On top of that, I have a life raft. In the highly unlikely event of a ditching, you have to have a life raft. A ditch bag on the left-hand side, you have food, water, handheld radios, signaling devices. Then on top of the right seat tank, I had a board, laptop computer. Remember, this is back in 2003. We weren't as connected as we are today. So I had to make a disk, and they had internet cafes back then. You had to take your disk into the internet cafe and upload it and get your website uploaded. And so it was a lot more difficult to upload, to get the website uploaded every time I landed, but I did that and kept the website going. Then on the right, you can see the HF radio. When you're crossing the oceans, you can talk on the HF, or you have to talk on the HF radio to air traffic control. So every hour you give them your current latitude and longitude, your next latitude and longitude in 1 hour, and then where you're going to be in 2 hours time. And then you repeat that every hour. And then on top of that, I have the chart. So that's what it looked like sitting in the cockpit for 15 or 16 hours or so. When I got back to the States, I visited my dad in Virginia, and a news crew came up from North Carolina and did a slot for their news. And so I've got that tape, and that's what I'm going to show next. And that'll just give you a quick summary of the rest of this trip, and then we'll move on to the other two trips. Now, the sound is a little light on this, so you might want to turn your volume up. Uh-oh.
I'm not getting any audio.
Is everybody else getting audio?
I turned mine all the way up, and it's still, I'm not getting too much. It's very faint.
Okay. Well, they just said that I crossed the Pacific, coming very close to Howland Island, where Amelia Earhart is thought to have gone down. I'm just saying that I went between two cyclones on the way from Pango Pango to New Zealand. And I had rain pounding on the cockpit for 5 hours. And then I'll stop it every now and then and tell you what it's saying. Oops, shouldn't have done that. Shouldn't have done that either. See if I can get it started. Oh, there we are. This is where he said, with the ghost of Amelia Earhart in my mind. So I told very few people until I was across the Pacific, because I was a little worried about this. So I came within 100 miles of Howland Island. I had a few mechanical problems. I went through 4 starters. And this is the meteorological problem on that last leg to New Zealand. I was between 2 cyclones with rain on the cockpit for 5 hours. But I went through, hang on, see if I can stop it. So then after New Zealand, I went through Australia, and there's a picture of Ayers Rock. So I went through Ayers Rock up to Singapore, down to the Seychelles, across Madagascar to Cape Town, then up through Africa. Oh,
Now, Kellyanne, I have a quick question for you. So you were doing this solo, and this one wasn't for the world record. You were just doing this.
Right. I was meeting people or groups with ALS as I was traveling. So a lot of it was fun and some of it was for ALS.
Okay, so my question is, when you're flying with 2 cyclones on either side of you and 5 hours of rain on your windscreen, I mean, that's exhausting. How did you, and it's very fatiguing. How did you get through that?
How did I get through it? Well, I knew with the 2 that one gave me headwinds and the other one gave me tailwinds, and one was moving away from me and one was moving towards me. So I knew that the winds were going to be overall in my favor, and I just had to get through the rain and everything else. And so I guess I'd convinced myself mentally that it was okay, and rain isn't going to affect anything. So yeah, it was a little mentally tiring, but when you got out the other side, it was a big relief. And I think the whole leg was only 10 hours, that leg. And then I was with friends in New Zealand, and then my dad arrived in New Zealand, so everything was fine after that. So again, this is just a very quick summary of this flight because it's so old, and then we'll spend a lot more time on the other ones. So I went up through Africa you missed the Taj Mahal in India. Sorry about that. There's the Taj Mahal in India. Then up through Africa, spent time in Europe, then across from some Scotland, Iceland, Greenland, Canada, and back south to where I met my dad in Virginia. See if this will keep going this time. White Cliffs of Dover up there. Then the icebergs in North Sea. That is seeing my dad. Leaving Virginia, heading back to Orlando. 40,000-mile flight, ended back in Florida. And so then once I got to Florida, a lot of the flying clubs, civic groups started inviting me to make presentations because they didn't know people that had flown around the world in a little plane. Happy to do it. I started making presentations. And as I said, I had this website the whole time, and people would read the website and then they would come up to me and say, "Oh, you have to write a book." And I would say, "Oh, no, I don't." But, you know, if I could raise some funds for ALS, I thought, okay, maybe it is such a good idea. So I wrote a book. Between 2004 and 2007, I flew around the US every summer making presentations to different groups and selling the book. And I was able to raise $80,000 for ALS research, which I thought was pretty good. But then this idea kept coming into my head and I couldn't get rid of it. And it said, you know, if you can raise $80,000 just by doing a regular trip around the world, if you could set or break a world record, you could make more money for ALS research. So I looked into it, and the old record was 54.6 miles an hour. So you set your own route and then you do it, you know, sleeping and doing your route. And then it's the total miles per hour for the route that you set, as long as you do a minimum distance, which is roughly, the minimum distance is roughly the distance of the Tropic of Cancer or the Tropic of Capricorn. So you have to stay between those 2 lines most of the flight to get the minimum distance. So I looked at the old record. I pulled charts out, I measured distances, I figured where I could get avgas, and I said, yeah, a Mooney can beat that record. It was, the old record was a Bonanza. So I recruited a female pilot, in earnest, started working on it, 18 months of planning to work out all the details. And we gave it a name, Dash for a Cure, because obviously our objective was to raise funds for ALS, and did some serious planning. And when you're doing a world record, you have to announce it ahead of time. You can't just do it and then afterwards say, see, we said it. You have to tell them ahead of time, declare it. So you have to pick a time when you're going to do it. So I talked to the weather people, and they said in this area of the world, the weather's the most benign in December. We know there are no hurricanes running across the Atlantic Ocean. They told me there were no cyclones running across the Pacific Ocean. I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember when the Voyager flew around the world. Somebody's nodding, a few people know. Anyway, that was back in the 80s, I think 84. Unrefueled all the way around the world. They chose the third week of December. They actually took longer than we took. We chose the first week of December, and we really didn't have too much bad weather. The other part of the planning is the minimum number of stops. In the US, things go pretty quickly, but when you're overseas, you've got customs, immigration, bureaucracy, things just take a lot longer in other countries. Yes, people are nodding. It's tougher. So minimum number of stops and the maximum distance per leg. So the objective was, or the plan was, Orlando, San Diego, Lihue, Hawaii, and then over to Guam here in the Western Pacific. Then,
Carol-Ann, were you worried at all about snow or icing conditions? And does the Mooney have any sort of de-icing capabilities? I mean, it looks like you stayed in some pretty warm climates, but I'm just wondering if that was a consideration.
Everything was warm except the US. I don't have any de-icing. I don't fly in ice. I hate ice. Don't even get close to clouds when it's cold. So yeah, we declared a start date. Had it been bad weather across the US, we would have had to postpone a little bit, but it was okay. And then I'll tell you about what happened when we came back. But yeah, all the rest of this world, no worries about icing. So really the only issue was right here over the Rockies pretty much. So after Guam, it was Chiang Mai, Thailand. I had a Mooney pilot friend that lived there, so he was supporting me there. Over India to Salalah, Oman, right here. I had a Mooney pilot friend that had landed there. He told me how to order the avgas, which I'd done. Djibouti, I'd landed there in 2003, so I knew that. The most difficult one was finding where to land in West Africa. And finally, I decided Bamako, Mali, right here. It's the capital of Mali. I mean, back then, it was a very tourist-friendly country where there are tourists. Usually customs and immigration go quicker. Timbuktu is very close. Well, it's in Mali, close to Bamako. That was a great tourist destination. So I finally chose Bamako, Mali right here, then the Cape Verde Islands, and then back to Florida. So what are we looking at in terms of distances? The three long ones, Hawaii to Guam, 3,200 nautical miles. Djibouti to Mali, 3,200 nautical miles, and Cape Verde back to Orlando, almost 3,300 nautical miles. Yeah, wow. So most planes, what do they do? 700,000 nautical miles if you're lucky. We're looking at long distances here. So the gas consumption, I was going to have 195 gallons, which puts me 15% over gross weight, officially checked out and signed off by the FAA. I'd always kept all my data on my fuel consumption. I had it from when I was 10% over gross for the 2003 flight. And then I just had to extrapolate for the 15% over gross. So I was going to use 7.9 gallons an hour for the first half. As we dropped weight from using the fuel, we could back off on the power settings, back off on the mixture settings, get it down to 7.3 gallons an hour for the second half, which gave us 26 hours endurance, which calculates out to 3,500 nautical miles distance, no wind, no reserve. Now, I don't know about you, but 3,500 nautical miles is a little bit too close to 3,300 nautical miles. So let's look at the wind to see how we feel better about this. So these charts are available for the winds all around the world at many different altitudes. And this is, I mean, you can see over in the US is our typical westerly winds. But when you get south of 20 north latitude, we have typically easterly winds. So from the Cape Verdes, our last stop here, we're looking at 15, 20, 25 knots on the tail for 20 hours. So with that push, we're counting on that little bit extra distance for our 20, 23, 26 hours to reduce that worrisome reserve that we have and give us more confidence that we can make it. So I looked at these charts for a long time, and they're pretty consistent winds. Every once in a while they change, but we're counting on these winds really to push us around around the world, except for the part across the US. We knew we'd have headwinds. So this is what the tanking looks like this time. These are each 60-gallon tanks, so they'll each take one 55-gallon drum. But we just lost our room for the life raft, ditch bag, everything else. So Winslow made us a small rescue raft, which fit behind this seat. Our ditch bag with many fewer things sat behind this seat. The bag of tools that we had for when we were doing our maintenance stop in Thailand sat in front of the right seat pilot's legs. The oxygen cylinder that we had sat in front of the left seat pilot's legs. I mean, everything had to be up front with us because of the weight of the gas right behind us. So for weight and balance requirements, everything had to be up front. So it was tight. We knew it was going to be tight. We knew we were going to be sitting there for 8 days, but if you want to do something like this, you have to put up with things like that. So here's my co-pilot, Carol. She has her Mooney in Texas. And this is us sitting in my Mooney on the ground at Oshkosh in 2008. And we sat in the Mooney for 24 hours. Sound like fun? Somebody's shaking their head. I mean, it was really a media stunt. We did interviews through the door, TV interviews, newspaper interviews, radio interviews. The objective was to get the word about what we're doing. But it turned out to be an excellent exercise. We had to sleep in the plane. I mean, we could both sleep at the same time, but we're going to have to do that when we're flying. So let's practice now. So we had to sleep. We had to eat what we were going to eat on a regular flight leg. Doctors were really worried about deep vein thrombosis, so they told us to take a baby aspirin a day. So we did that while we were doing this simulation as well. Also to do the leg and ankle exercises that we do when we're flying in the airlines. So we did that every hour. Then later on, after this simulation, but later on in the year before the flight, we did a long flight together. I had all the equipment in my Mooney in Florida. Carol needed to practice with everything, so she flew to me. We did a really long flight together. She changed the gas systems between the back tank and the front tanks. We tested out the HF system. She used the satellite phone to make sure that she could use everything just as well as I could use it. And then we had a support team. We had people on the ground, one in the Far East, one in Europe, and one in the US. They were following us all the time in all the different time zones. And they'd flown in those areas of the world, so they could contact us if we needed it and give us any support. Once we're in the air, we just have to keep flying, and they could tell us anything we needed to know.
Carolyn, I have to ask, what about in the bathroom?
Aha. Okay, well, that I'd already worked out in 2003, but I was using a Little John with the Lady Jane adapter. Does everybody know what that is? So that's what I was using in 2003. Obviously, we don't want to store it with 2 of us and 23-hour legs. We don't want to be storing it. So we each had our own Lady Jane, and we had a tube attached to it, and it went out the bottom of the plane. So we didn't have to store it this time. And the method to do it in a Mooney is you have to turn backwards and kneel on the seat facing backwards. That gives you enough elevation for everything to flow downhill. Okay?
It's gravity, right?
Yeah, you used gravity. You can't do it sitting down, just doesn't work. Anyway, it worked, and we didn't have to store it, and that just made it much, much easier. Okay, so 18 months of putting things together, working everything out. There's a lot of details behind this, but that's a quick summary of what we had to put together. So on December 2nd, 2008, 8:32 p.m., we took off from Orlando International, headed west, nonstop across to San Diego, landed, I think it was around 10:20, TV cameras, video cameras. So we had to talk to, the objective is to get the word out about ALS. So we did that first. gassed up, got a resupply of food, took off at noon to Lihue, Hawaii. I think this is around 1 in the morning. Oh no, the video stopped. Here it goes. Every night landing, we made an instrument approach. We didn't want any illusions to be giving us bad feedback into our brains. So we always had instrument approaches. Carol's in the left seat doing an ILS-35 approach into Lihue. We had a ground crew on the ground. They were ready for us. We taxied, shut down on the ramp, got out. Well, the first thing they did was give us a Hawaiian lei each, which was really nice. But then they whisked us off to the hotel. We got 4 or 5 hours sleep. Came back, they'd already started collecting money for ALS, so we did interviews and photo shoots and all the rest of it. Also, I had a friend with ALS in Indiana, Chip, he's in the bottom right-hand picture, and he'd had ALS for 7 years, and it's a neurodegenerative disease. The neurons quit working and the muscle, or the neurons quit working and the muscle, it stops the muscles from working. So he's immobile in bed, but your brain works 100% of the time. You can see it in the picture. He's got a little gleam in his eye. He knows everything that's going on. Your brain works. It's just your body doesn't work. So that's where the funds are going to for research to find a cure. They still haven't found one, but they're working on it. So then we gassed up. It had been a 16.7-hour flight, 9 hours on the ground, half a night's sleep, back out to the airport to do all this. Called the weather guy. I had a flight plan worked out because there happens to be an airway route from Lihue, Hawaii to Guam. Made sense, so I already had planned the air route. But there was a low pressure system to the northwest of Hawaii. That gave the first 1,000 nautical miles had headwinds. This is one of these 3,000 nautical mile legs. We cannot do it with any headwinds. So I got the weather guy on the phone, and he gave me the latitudes and longitudes where we would have very slight headwinds, and then we get better and better tailwinds. So I refiled the flight plan, which is the revised route. The yellow one on the bottom is the exact route that we flew. We did have slight tailwinds. They got slight headwinds, stronger and stronger tailwinds when we turn west. So things were going as planned. Now you can't wait till you get to Guam to decide if you're going to make it or not. So you have to have the calculation on whether you're going to deviate to your alternate much sooner, because our alternate was the Marshall Islands. So when the back tanks ran dry, we'd normally been flying for about 14 hours. We knew how much was left in the main tanks. We did our calculations, and this night we had a guaranteed 2 hours remaining in the tanks when we got to Guam. So this was a go situation. We kept flying through the night. 23 hours later, we made it over the island of Guam. Where was the only rainstorm in the Pacific? Right over the island of Guam. But it wasn't that bad. It was a VFR arrival. We landed. We had another ground crew, Chuck this time. So we taxied to Chuck's hangar, shut down, pulled us in the hangar, kept us dry, took us to the hotel. We got another 4 hours sleep or so, had some lunch, headed back to the airport. Now, again, we had camera crews here because not many small single engine planes go to Guam. So they wanted to know what we were doing there. Could you hear that one better? No, I couldn't hear it. Anyway, I'm just saying why we're in Guam doing this flight around the world to break a world record to raise funds for ALS. That's pretty much what I'm saying. But you can see we've also changed uniforms. This is the last stop in US territory. We're heading internationally. So to make it through customs and immigration easier, it looks better if you look like a pilot, which means not a nice red comfy flight suit. It means an airline pilot, white shirt, stripes on the shoulders, black tie, black pants, black shoes. So that's what we wear for the rest of the trip. So we leave Guam early afternoon, head out over the Pacific, over the Philippines, South China Sea, Vietnam, Cambodia, to Chiang Mai, Thailand, our first international stop. Here are Yui and Yui. You can see all the paperwork. They marched us through customs, through immigration. They got us to the hotel within 30 minutes of landing. We could never have done that on our own. So got a couple of hours sleep, back to the airport. And this is our maintenance stop. We had 70 hours on the engine since we left. The mechanics from Siam General Aviation came out. We changed the oil filter, cleaned the air filter, cleaned and rotated the spark plugs, and rechecked the magneto timing. Everything was working perfectly. Cowled up, gassed up, ready to go again. So 20.4 hours for the flight, 8 hours on the ground, including the maintenance check, and we're off again. Left Chiang Mai mid-afternoon, flew over India to Salalah, Oman, arrived early morning. As I said, a friend had landed there or had been there before. I'd already ordered the avgas. I knew they didn't have avgas in pumps there, so I'd already ordered it. What I didn't know was it hadn't been delivered to the airport, and it was the first day of a 4-day holiday. So it took us a little longer to get the avgas than we had planned, but I knew we were siphoning it out. I'd practiced siphoning at home in my hangar. I brought all the siphoning equipment with me. So I knew it would take 30 minutes to siphon out of the barrel into the tanks. So a little bit longer on the ground than we had planned, but we only have a short leg coming up. So it's 5.5 hours down the Gulf of Aden to Djibouti. Because of the late start, late arrival, we got there just around dusk, but their support crew had been calling them, telling them we were going to arrive. So as soon as we parked on the ramp, a little truck, tractor and trailer with 3 55-gallon drums pulled right up in front of us, 2 55-gallon drums into the back tanks, 1 55-gallon drum into the main tanks, and we're off to the hotel. This is our only full night's rest, 8 solid hours in a hotel. We were exhausted by this time. We absolutely needed it. Got a good solid night's sleep. Headed to the airport at 6 a.m., took off at 10 to 7. So the customs immigration went very quickly, exiting Djibouti. Left Djibouti, flew out over Ethiopia, over Sudan. We're chit-chatting in the cockpit. We're both feeling so much better until 10 hours and 8 minutes into the flight, all of a sudden the engine starts coughing. We hit the boost pump, switch the gas to the main tanks, and look at each other and said, what happened there? It appears we were shorted about 30 gallons out of the 55-gallon drums. And I admit, I was exhausted the night before. I never went back and checked to make sure that the drums were empty. So we do some calculations and we can no longer make our destination of Bamako, Mali. So, I mean, we always have alternates for these things. So our alternate is Niamey, Niger. We used the sat phone, called our ground crew, our support crew, told them what had happened and told them to tell the gang in the FBO in Niamey that we'd be there around midnight. And we're feeling pretty bummed, but you know, we have to keep flying, so we just keep going. A couple of hours later, our support crew called us back. They'd been in touch with the FBO in Niamey, who informed them that they had just run out of avgas. Yeah, now we're really bummed. We said, okay, tell them to get high octane car gas. I'd already practiced it at home. I talked to the guy that had done the STC for our types of engines. I knew that as long as I kept a little bit of avgas for takeoff and the high power work, I could cruise all day on high octane car gas. So that's what they were going to do. Unbeknownst to me, the pilot that had flown around this part of Africa, he went down into his basement, got his paperwork, starts making phone calls, and he finds avgas in Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso. I said, where? Anyway, we figured out where it was. As we got closer to Niamey, we realized we had enough gas to keep going. So we could, well, we could keep going, but when he first told us this, we told him we don't have a landing permit for Burkina Faso. We have a landing permit from Bamako, Mali. We have a landing permit for Niamey, Niger. We only have an overflight permit for the country of Burkina Faso. Bo, who got all my permits, works in Denmark. He'd stayed in touch with the support team. He knew what was happening. He got to work, and by the end of business that day, he got us a landing permit for Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso. Unbelievable. Yes. 1 a.m. we landed at Ouagadougou. Lasana did the paperwork right on the wing. The gas guys showed up. They fill our main tanks. Carol and I pool our US dollars, pay them off. We're back in the air in 1 hour and 15 minutes. Absolutely the fastest turnaround of the whole trip. So
Caroline, I just want to interject real quick. For anybody who hasn't flown internationally, what she just described that happened is a miracle. I was about to say nothing short of a miracle, but it is a miracle, because when you're flying to these foreign countries, a lot of them will require 2 weeks notice to fly into their country. I'd say the shortest window of time I've ever seen is 48 hours notice to fly into a country. So the fact that this happened in such a short span of time, and that they were there and ready to receive you and field you so quickly, because a lot of countries, foreign countries, they don't work around the clock like the US
Right.
does. You know, they're in bed and they're going to get to you at 10 o'clock in the morning when they're awake and have had their breakfast and their coffee. So that is
exactly.
a miracle that happened the way it did. I'm shocked and amazed.
And Jeppesen and the US companies that get these permits couldn't have done it. It took Bo, who's in Denmark, who works with these guys on a first name basis every day. He's about the only one that could have done it, and he did it.
He knew some people, because that doesn't happen by cold calling. That doesn't happen through a corporation. That happens through personal relationships.
Exactly. He knew Lasana. He knew him, you know, probably not personally, but he'd worked with him many times in the past and got it done. Absolutely. Couldn't have done it any other way. So yes, I was very lucky that way. So we left, where were we? Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso, flew over our intended destination, flew over Senegal, over Dakar, 2 hours to the Cape Verde Islands. We planned another hotel stop, but there was a fast moving cold front heading for Florida. So we said, just get the gas and get out of here. And that's what we did. We gassed up, we got some food so we could eat it on the way. I had 2 flight plans this time, depending on the weather. This night in the Atlantic Ocean, there was a huge high pressure system. So we could go as far north as we wanted, and we were going to get great tailwinds. When the back tanks ran dry after 14 hours, we had a calculated 3 hours remaining in the tanks when we got to Orlando. So we didn't have to stop in the Bahamas, didn't have to stop on the East Coast, keep going all the way. When we got to Miami Center, they're giving us vectors, they're congratulating us. The weather was bad, so we had to do a full ILS approach into Orlando, but everybody's congratulating us as we're coming in. And they have TV crews in, this video should keep going. TV crews and friends and everybody was there, and newspaper journalists to welcome us back and congratulate us. And it was a very successful trip. 8 days, 12 hours, 18 minutes, and 53 seconds for a new world record of 115.35 miles an hour. Remember, the old one was 54.6, 56.4, 56.4.
And Caroline, can we talk about the fact that this isn't a female specific world record? This is a world record, period, point blank.
Yes, men and women are together. There is one world record. It goes by weight of plane. So there's a C1C is my weight between 2,400 pounds and 3,700 pounds. C1A, C1B are the smaller planes. C1D are the bigger planes. So it's just by weight. As I said, 2 guys flying a Bonanza had the old world record, and Carol and I have the new world record. So yes, and donations for ALS were over $300,000. Wrote another book. Sorry. And continued making presentations. Let me get a sip of water here. Continued making presentations. But do you think we saw anything on that trip? Guaranteed no. So who has to fly around the world again? Who has to fly eastbound this time? Because, you know, a lot of people fly eastbound. And I don't know why. I will say, after doing it eastbound, I really prefer westbound. You have longer days, you have more tailwinds, except across the US. Anyway, so I planned this one for April 2011 to March 2012. Headed up the East Coast, April 2011, plus going to different countries that I hadn't been to before, and a really relaxed trip. So I jumped off from St. John's, Newfoundland, across to the Azores. Sorry. Let me get some more water.
Well, and Caroline, it looks like this time you really did take your time and did a lot more sightseeing. Was anybody with you for this one, or were you solo?
Oh, that's my next slide.
Oh, perfect.
I had 6 different pilots that wanted to do different crossings. The first one on the left here, he crossed the Atlantic with me. Oh, they, boy. Or they wanted to see different parts of the world. This one traveled in Australia with me. This one in New Zealand with me. So everybody wanted to do something different. And actually it turned out to be fun for me to see the trip through their eyes, to see the countries through their eyes. So I normally like flying alone, but it actually turned out to be fun flying with different pilots and seeing their vision of things different from mine. So we had a lot of fun. So this is coming into Horta in the Azores. On the backside here, on the other side here, the island of Pico. These are all volcanic islands, so no nice sandy beaches here, all volcanic lava. And the only place for runways is right on the coast. And not all the islands have runways. So we came into Horta, traveled around Horta over to Pico. Beautiful islands, friendly Portuguese people, just really had a lot of fun here. And then down to Santa Maria, which is the easternmost island and the only island with avgas. So you have to stop in at Santa Maria and then continue on to Europe. So I went to Porto, then Lisbon. And as I like to say, I zigzagged around Europe. I mean, because of the 2008 trip, their flying magazines had published articles on us, but I'd never been over there. So during the air shows, and they have lots of air shows in the summer, they invited me to give presentations and talk to the people. So I did a lot of that as I traveled around. So just some stats. Every landing in Europe, you pay for the landing. So at a small airport, it might be $20. Medium-sized airport, $75. Big airport, I don't like to think about it. I tried not to go to those. The weather is the pits all summer, so I didn't have to do any hood work. Everything is actual approaches. And registered planes have to have an extra insurance amendment for the time that you're in Europe. So I knew how long I'd be spending in Europe, and I had to be out of Europe and into Turkey by the end of September. So I was doing all this traveling around, and then I was in Germany. I was going to visit friends in Switzerland, give a presentation and meet some people with ALS in Italy, presentation in Slovenia, presentation and ALS people in Austria, and then out to Turkey. But as I was planning this last couple of weeks, a cold front was coming through. So I stayed in Germany a little bit longer before I headed to Switzerland. So a couple of days later, I headed to Switzerland. And by then, I was still a flatland pilot from Florida, so I wasn't used to flying in mountains. So there's no way I was going into the Alps in bad weather. So I waited a few days, came in over this last ridge, and then I had to turn away from the airport. The airport's behind us, and then drop altitude in the valley, and then turn around and back towards the airport of Samadan. And here I was going to be meeting friends and hiking in the Alps for a couple of days. There's the airport of Samadan. And my friend has a Swift airplane, and he used to keep it at this airport. But down the valley, there are some jet jockeys, and they're expanding and using other airports. So the price for landing here is, well, back then it was 100 euros and 100 euro a night parking fee. So he doesn't keep his Swift there anymore, and I'm not going to be going back there either. But it was a nice day, and then headed out the other side of the valley and around and out to Italy, and then Slovenia, Austria, and the rest of the way.
A quick question, Caroline, about your time in or flying over Switzerland. So I'm assuming that the Mooney didn't have pressurization. Did you have to carry oxygen with you, or were you able to just go above 10 and come down below in such a short amount of time that you didn't need oxygen? How did you work that out?
No, I always had oxygen with me. Just like when Carol and I were flying, we had to be at 16,000 once, but we always had oxygen at night. The flying pilot always stayed on oxygen at night. So I had a full oxygen cylinder with me, and the mountain high dosing system. So I never had to get it refilled while I was traveling, and only used it when I needed to. So then I spent a couple of weeks in Turkey, looking at old Roman ruins, obviously, and then headed to Israel. one of the countries I wanted to visit, landed at Horta, learned that I would not be allowed to fly in Israel when I was there, but I had presentation. I gave a presentation in Horta, 2 presentations in Tel Aviv. The pilots there are as bitten by the bug as we are. They just loved all the details in the presentation. I asked tons of questions, but you know, they're kind of hemmed in with countries that don't like them. So when they go flying for their $100 hamburger, they fly to Cyprus and back. So that was in Tel Aviv. Then I went to Jerusalem and visited the top left picture of Dome on the Mount of Olives. Bottom left picture, went through the wall to Bethlehem. And then when I came back to Haifa, did I say Horta before? I meant Haifa. I always confuse those two. Haifa, a pilot said, "Do you want to go to Masada?" And I said, "Oh, yes, but I'm not allowed to fly." He said, "If I sit in your right seat, you are." So the next day we took off and went to Masada. Here's the airport. It's the lowest airport in the world, 1,230 feet below sea level. So if you look down at my altimeter, and I'm not even at pattern altitude yet, I'm at 200 feet. So I flew over the airport and then came back and did my pattern as my altimeter unwound to 1,230 feet below sea level. And so there's the airport. Masada is off to the right-hand side and the Dead Sea is off to the left-hand side. So we toured Masada, got a guided tour, and then flew back to Haifa that afternoon. Flying VFR in Israel isn't like flying VFR in the States. It's more like controlled VFR. You have to report certain reporting points and you have to do what the guy, air traffic control, is telling you to do. So we were coming back into Haifa, got behind a slower plane. We weren't allowed to overtake. We just had to slow down. He landed in Haifa, then we landed in Haifa. So very strict control flying. But I mean, they're, as I said, bitten by the bug as we are. The next day, I was leaving from Haifa to go to Amman, Jordan. IFR flight plan, but still, I was just a little worried. I didn't know how it would go. I mean, the handoff just went like any handoff in the US from one to the other. So I guess the good news is they talk to each other. They work together. It was absolutely no trouble whatsoever.
So Carol-Ann, were you able to fly directly from Israel into Jordan?
Yep, straight from Haifa to Amman.
Okay, that's interesting. So I've deployed to the Middle East quite a few times, and there was a time when I had to fly from Jordan to Lebanon, and we couldn't go as the crow flies because 2 reasons: Syria and Israel, right? Because Israel and Lebanon don't get along, and Syria, we could have gotten shot down. So what we ended up doing is going down through Jordan, Red Sea, up through or up across the Saudi Peninsula, up through the Med, and then drop down into Lebanon. So what was a 30-minute as the crow flies flight was an hour and a half.
Right.
No, I guess I just wasn't aware you could fly directly from Israel into Jordan.
I had been told that too. I thought I was going to have to go down and up the Red Sea and in, and I filed direct and they gave me direct. So I don't know if somebody else pulled some strings or if that's the way they let me do it. And absolutely, the handover was just like any handover in the US. So I took that as good news that they worked together. Yeah, it worked for me. So Jordan is, I mean, all the people in the area that want to be mechanics or pilots or air traffic controllers, they go to Jordan because that's where all the flight schools are, mechanics schools. I mean, it's an aviation haven for the local people. So up in Amman, they had the flight schools, actually spent time there, but also in the hospital because they were just starting to study ALS in their country. Also, bottom middle picture, floated in the Dead Sea, covered myself with Dead Sea mud, did all the touristy things. Then headed down to Aqaba, where there's also a flight school, and Basma was the chief instructor there. Of course, we did some flying, but we also went to Petra, the lost city built by the Nabateans, and toured around Petra. And then when I come back to the States, I always contact the people before I use their pictures and presentations and in the book and make sure that they're going to be okay with this. And so when I got back to the States, I got back in touch with Basma. And between the time that I left and got to the States, she had met and married the brother of the King of Jordan. So she's now Princess Basma. And since then, she's had 2 kids. And we have been in contact a few times. They want to fly around the States or fly around the world. They're both, obviously, both pilots. Things haven't been going very well in the world, so they haven't done it yet. But certainly, I hope someday to see them in the States when they're flying around. Then I went up to, here you can see on the red line, came down the Red Sea and then up to Cairo, spent time in Cairo, visited the pyramids, down to Luxor in Egypt, and then headed Djibouti. I'm actually not staying in Djibouti, I'm going to Kenya because my relatives are coming to Kenya, and I'm also running out of cash and they're bringing me the next stash of cash. But I needed one 55-gallon drum of gas in Djibouti. So I called ahead of time, found out how much it was, make sure I had the right enough money, get there, get the 55-gallon drum, give him $910. He looks through all the $100 bills and hands 4 back and said, I need new $100 bills. They were the old 1996 bills. They will not accept them. The banks won't accept them. He said, absolutely not. Luckily, during the time we were discussing this, an unregistered plane parked next to me. And so I went over and spoke to that captain, and he took my 4 old $100 bills and luckily gave me 4 new $100 bills, and the gas guy was happy. Otherwise, there is no way he would have let me leave there. I was stuck. Back then, the date was 2000. By the time I got to Indonesia, the date was 2006. So always get, I mean, if you're traveling anywhere, the newest $100 bills from the bank. And whenever they give you them, you can look through them. And if you have any old ones, they will go back to the safe and bring you new $100 bills. I've done it since then. So got down to Kenya, had a fantastic time with the relatives flying around Kenya. And then I was heading to Madagascar, a country I'd never been to before. So why was I going to Madagascar? To see lemurs, because that's the only country that has lemurs. But before I was going there, I knew some people in France that were supporting an orphanage on the very southwest tip, Androica in Madagascar. So when I was heading there, I said, I'm going there, what do you need? So they had me buy pencils, paper, notebooks, notebooks and chalkboards. When they run out of pencil and paper, the kids can learn to write on chalkboards. So I dropped them all off here, and then the crew went down to Androica while I went to some national parks. And then we had a sat phone discussion at 10 o'clock, well, no, that morning that I was going to fly down there. They gave me the latitudes and longitudes so I could fly over the orphanage. And at 10 o'clock, you can see the picture on the right, I found the orphanage and I flew over one direction and then I flew over the other direction and then I flew over and then I dropped my gear and waggled my wings and I did everything to say hello, but I mean, I couldn't land there. So I went on to my next destination. And we had a satellite phone conference at 7 o'clock that night. So I called Uber and he said, did you see it? Did you see it? And I said, yeah, I saw the kids standing in the schoolyard spelling out my name. And I said, I was just amazed. And he said, for the adults, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. The kids had never seen an airplane before. Nothing goes over that part of Madagascar. It is so poor, so rural. I mean, really, there is nothing there. For me, 4 years later, 2016, I was part of the ground crew going to Androica, and we put in solar panels so they had light in the dispensary. And it is rural, poor. I mean, I'd never seen such poverty before. But I was glad to bring something different to for them to see when I was there. So the lemur on top is a sifaka lemur. It's different from all the rest of them. They tend to say in small family units, the little ones stay on the mother's back for the first 6 months. These are the ring-tailed lemurs. The one on the right are the brown lemurs. And the sifaka lemurs can't walk like normal four-legged animals. So they stand up on their rear feet and they skip. And they still have a little one. This one has a little one on his back, but that's the only, I mean, because their forearms or forelegs are so short, they can't walk like normal four-legged animals. So fascinating. Went up to the northern part of Madagascar, but all the lemurs were in the trees, so I really didn't get any good pictures up there. Then it's time to cross the Indian Ocean. I went up to the Seychelles and I had a slot time a couple of days later, 7 a.m. into Oman. So I had to cross the Indian Ocean, across India, and then Malaysia again, Cambodia, Thailand, Cambodia, and then I was going down to Malaysia. Of course, we have the intertropical convergence zone in the middle again. Now, this day, this was before I was going. I was just taking pictures of the intertropical convergence zone. Didn't have to fly on this day. The night that I flew, there were 3 very isolated, lucky for me, storms and nothing else. So very lucky crossing up to Muscat, and then across India and down to Malaysia. Wasn't bad at all. This was during the day, and it was pretty easy coming down into Malaysia. I was landing close to an airport close to Kuala Lumpur. One of the captains from Malaysia Air had invited me to give a presentation to the EAA chapter, do some interviews, and he'd already got permission for us to fly around the Twin Towers in Kuala Lumpur when I got there. Unfortunately, I'd had a gear problem, but I made sure everything was safe. Don't get this opportunity twice. So I said, okay, let's meet up and fly around the towers. He had a photographer in his plane. We flew around the towers. I have one of my co-pilots there, so I'm diagnosing the problem. I found a circuit breaker that was out, so I made sure the gear was down, hit the circuit breaker, and the gear came down. But they have a lot going on, presentations, meeting the Director General of Civil Aviation. It's 100th anniversary of flying in Malaysia, so I have all these things going on. When I'm not doing these social and interviews and other engagements, I'm under the plane trying to diagnose what's gone wrong. My mechanic in Florida is 12 hours time difference. The Mooney gear actuator specialist in California is 9 hours time difference. And it's December 28th and everybody wants to get ready for the new year anyway. So we finally get it figured out, and it is the back clutch spring in the actuator. Believe it or not, I had one in the back of the plane, but I didn't have the tools to check the actuator pressure. If I took the actuator out and replaced it and then put it back in, I couldn't check that the gear actuator pressure was correct. So I chose to fly to Perth, where I knew they had the equipment and the mechanics, with my gear down. So these were very slow, long trips. To Bali was 11 hours, to Port Hedland was another 7 hours, and then to Perth was 6.5 hours, all at 100 knots instead of 140 knots, and at 10 gallons an hour instead of 7.5, 8 gallons an hour. So they were long, slow flights, but when I got to Perth, the mechanics were there, they had the tools, I had the part, we were able to fix everything, and I could keep going. So it was a tough 3 days, but I made it. Okay, then I get to fly around Australia. Australia is about the same landmass as the US, only we have 330 million people, and they have 22 million people. A lot of open space. On this first leg from Perth, just west of Perth, just east of Perth, to Forest, Australia was 5 hours. When they're driving from going west to Perth, they have to take 2.5 days. So we're talking huge distances here. Down here is the Great Australian Bight. This is 300-foot cliffs. I don't remember how many, 60 miles long or even more than that. See the cars going across? They don't get to see it, but we get to fly right along the coast and look at it. Absolutely brilliant. Up to Ayers Rock, down to Cooper Pedy. Cooper Pedy is the opal capital of the world. So this is the opal mining. When they mine for opal, they drill a hole about 3 feet in diameter going down. They dump all the dirt on the side of the hole. They put somebody down there to see if there's any opal there. If there is, they excavate. If they don't, they just move over and drill another hole. So these are all holes with piles of dirt next to them. There's no sense filling them in. You're not allowed in the mining area at night. They've lost people down those holes. So, I mean, it's just a huge, huge area full of holes. And it's really hot. I mean, it's over 47 Celsius in the 120 degrees. So they actually live underground. I was in an underground church, an underground hotel. It stays 74 degrees the whole time. They pipe in air from outside, and then they have lights there. I found it a little claustrophobic, but sure is better than the heat up top. Then went down to Kangaroo Island, over to Mildura, down to Melbourne, over to Sydney, and then across to Byron Bay, the easternmost point on Australia. And I'd taken Taylor from Byron Bay on her first Young Eagles flight back when I was there in 2003. And when she knew I was coming back, she said, can I fly with you to New Zealand? So she did this leg. She'd started taking lessons, but she hadn't finished her license. So she did this leg to Lord Howe Island and then across to New Zealand with me. And New Zealand is an absolutely fantastic place to fly. Fantastic for everything aviation, building planes. This is a Mosquito they were building in Ardmore. We went down to where they're building or rebuilding tiger moths down in the South Island here. Just had a fantastic time. I actually left the Mooney in Wanaka right here in the South Island and flew with Flying New Zealand in their 172s. We landed on a beach. We went up Milford Sound. We landed on a sheep station, backcountry sheep stations, and their little strips, can't call them a runway. Things I couldn't do with the Mooney, so we just had a fantastic time. Flew around Mount Cook and up mountains, really actually learned a lot about mountain flying here with them. Had a fantastic time. But then, of course, if I want to get back home, I have to cross the Pacific again. So we have a 7.5-hour flight to Tonga, 4-hour flight to American Samoa, 10-hour flight to Christmas Island, 8.5-hour flight to Hawaii, and another 16-hour flight back to California, then across the States. So another fantastic flight around the world. Donations for ALS are up to 523,000. They haven't got a drug for ALS yet, unfortunately. I mean, it's 20 years we've been working on this now, at least I've been helping support them. They've had times when they think this is going to be the drug, and then it just doesn't prove to have that great a success, unfortunately. But we're going to keep working on it because we've got to stop people from dying from ALS and Lou Gehrig's disease. Anyway, any more questions?
I have a question. At what altitude do you make those flights? Start with the record-breaking flight.
Well, when we're going across first of all, my engine is the most economical, most efficient between 6,000 and 8,000 feet. So I always try and fly at those altitudes or in between those altitudes, because that's when the engine is running at its best. Sometimes, when we're going across the Rockies on the first leg of that world record flight, I think we had to go up to 12, didn't have to go up to 14 on that one. So we stayed at 12. Came back down as soon as we could. Later on that trip, to get the permit to cross, it wasn't Oman, Yemen. They made us fly, or they said we were going to have to fly at 16,000 feet. I said, yes, we could do it. We'll do it. I'd say anything to get a permit back then. But we weren't going to be that heavy with gas, so we could make it up to 16,000. We had the oxygen. But as soon as we got up there, we talked to air traffic control and they let us back down. So, I always tried to get lower whenever we could to get back into the most efficient engine running altitude.
Great, thanks.
India, I think, made us fly at 12 all the way across. Any other questions? As you can see on this slide, there are 3 books. There's one book about each of the flights around the world. All the money, 100%, goes straight to ALS research. I don't recover any costs. I paid for all the printing and everything else, but all the money goes to ALS research. So if anybody's interested in one, I can mail them to you. Actually, I'll be back in New Mexico in February. I can bring them to you.
So we buy the book through you?
Pardon?
We buy the book through you?
Yes. If you get it from me, all the money goes to ALS. If you get it through Amazon, all the money goes to somebody in Amazon who's reselling my books.
Okay, how do we do that?
Just send me an email and I'll tell you how to donate, because you donate the money straight to ALS. It doesn't even come through me. And I'll mail you the book, or I'll bring it to you in February, whichever you want.
Carol Ann, do you mind if I put your email address in the chat? Is that okay?
Absolutely. Thank you.
I have one more question.
Yes.
I certainly haven't flown around the world. I've flown in a few countries, and I find, particularly in Latin American countries, some controllers won't even talk to me. I've flown with other planes, and the other people I've flown with confirm that I'm perfectly loud on the radio, and they just won't respond to a woman. Did you have that problem?
Well, I have a low voice and I get called he or him or all the time. So I don't correct them. So maybe they, I mean, no, I haven't had that problem. And it could be because of that. When Carol was with me, she has a normal, more normal female voice. We didn't have any trouble with anybody not talking to us.
Connie, I've heard something similar. Prior to going to the Middle East, I had heard some females, particularly more like transport aircraft, C-130, C-17, things like that, saying that they would have problems with certain Middle Eastern countries. And for all three of my deployments over there, I never had any issues. And my biggest concern was always Saudi Arabia, because they're the ones I had heard the worst stories about. And I always flew, with a headscarf just in case, we had to do an emergency landing there. But I mean, they were incredibly responsive and professional over the radio. There was one time I had to turn around and we'd taken off out of Qatar. We had to turn around and go back. It wasn't an emergency, but it was kind of a precautionary landing sort of situation. And they were incredibly supportive. So I think the days of that are kind of behind us, I hope.
I hope so too.
But I have heard of that. I just haven't experienced it personally. So I'm glad to hear Carol-Ann didn't either.
I'm glad to hear that too. I hope we're making progress, but this was actually in the last few years in Mexico. So we're not completely out of the woods. But, on the other hand, there are a lot of female controllers in Mexico too. So it'll get there.
Yep, hope so.
I have a quick question for you, Carol-Ann.
Okay. Hi, Alexis.
Hello there. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Do you plan on another trip? Is there going to be a fourth trip?
I'm kind of hooked on soaring right now. So I'm
Okay.
trying to stretch my wings and soar longer distances every summer. So no, I had a couple of trips planned. I had one around the poles planned. But that's a lot more scary and dangerous than just flying around this normal way around the world. And I just decided it wasn't worth it.
Gotcha.
So no.
Understood.
That's an unfortunately no.
And please let me know when you're in Albuquerque in February. That'd be awesome to get to see you.
I will. I will be back in February, so I'll see you then.
Awesome. And just a quick plug, her books are absolutely phenomenal. So if you loved her story today, please buy them.
Thank you. Glad you enjoyed.
Absolutely. I sure did.
This was awesome.
My books are supposed to show up in the mail tomorrow, so I'm super excited to dig into them and read them. I'll take them on some trips with me and read them in the plane. It'll be great.
I hope you enjoy them too.
So Carol-Ann, if you don't mind me asking, how did you fund these trips? If all of the money was going to research for ALS, did you have sponsors? Was it self-funded? Did you have to save up? How did you make that work? Because it seems like they probably weren't cheap.
No. Okay. So the first trip back in 2003, I mean, of course, I was paying everything by myself. I rented out my house while I was gone. I rented out my hangar while I was gone. So I had no expenses back at home. And luckily, I mean, I stayed with a lot of friends in a lot of countries. And I think the total trip cost me about $25,000. So yeah, most people are shocked, but I mean, when I did stay in hotels, they're very cheap hotels. And so that was a relatively inexpensive trip. The 2008 trip, we didn't have too many hotels, but I think there were 3. Carol and I split the gas. So really the biggest expense was gas and then all the overflight permits for Bo, who really deserves a lot. So I think, I don't remember the final cost of that, but it might have been somewhere between $15,000 and $20,000. Now the last one, avgas prices were up to $13 a gallon in Europe. I mean, the exchange rate was significantly bad for the US dollar. I was going to cancel it, and then I thought, if I cancel it, I'll never do it. So I did it anyway. I quit adding up the dollars when it reached 60,000. So I don't know how much it cost me. I don't care. It was a great trip. I know other people have spent 150,000 doing these trips. I mean, they just pay people to do everything for them. I, usually didn't use handlers, did everything in each of the countries on my own. I used Bo to get me the overflight permits, but he was $100 a country. You use Jeppesen, they're $500, $1,000. I mean, they're a whole lot more. So you can find ways of doing it relatively inexpensively. So, and the answer to that is I had a good job. I worked as an engineer. I saved all my money when I was working. So I had enough for retirement. And so I just chose to spend the money to do these trips. And then I paid for the books and I pay for all the flying around the US. And so 100% of the money donated for the books goes straight to ALS. Otherwise, you never get to 523,000 because that's how much I probably paid for gas and flying around the States and maintenance and everything for the Mooney in 20 years.
Well, it sounds like it's money well spent, if you ask me. I mean, you've got memories and have met people, and I mean, you just can't replicate that any other way. So
Absolutely. I'm glad I didn't cancel the third trip. I'm glad I did it. Probably won't do another trip, but yeah, you're right. Great memories.
Hey, Carol Ann. I'm Amanda here. I had a two-part question. I flight instructed in Germany for a little bit, and I know with general aviation in some countries, they like to speak both the host country language and English. And then I took a little 172 kind of England, Ireland, Scotland, and all the way back around. And, we did our research as much as we could before, but, we learned about the general aviation form and things like that. But we came into a lot of situations where I'm like, wait, what are the rules? Why are there two separate types of IFR in England? Did you run into operational regulation, weird stuff for general aviation along your way?
I mean, I'd done as much research just as you did ahead of time, and you try not to get tripped up. I found that by landing and meeting with a pilot, in each country and getting that pilot to share with you rules, regulations, specifics for their country really helped. So pretty much everywhere I went, I mean, as long as I could, well, in the first place you go into has to be a relatively big airport anyway, and you've got your general declaration and all the rest of that stuff. Then after that, if I was going to smaller airports, I would meet with the local pilots and get as much local information as possible. Oh, sorry about that. So, I'd recommend that to anybody is, get with the locals as soon as you can and learn the details for the country you're going in.
Yeah, just like anything else, networking ahead of time, for sure.
Exactly.
Language issues, like communication wise?
Yes, France, Italy, Germany always spoke English, but France speaks French except for the non-French speaking. If the tower is closed, everybody stays in French and they never switch back to English. When you're flying and the French air traffic controllers are speaking French to the French planes and English to the other ones, you kind of lose situational awareness. You're only getting information about half or less than half of the planes. So France and Italy and those countries, yeah, you're kind of losing half the conversations. There's not much you can do about it. They choose to speak Italian with the Italian planes and French with the French planes. That's what they do.
Yeah, thank you.
Now, Carolyn, how long would you say you had prep time before each of the trips?
You mean each of the world flights or each lesson?
No, each of the around the world flights. Just kind of like we were just talking about, you planning, you networking, all of that sort of thing. Was it months in advance, years?
Yeah, the first one was 7 months of planning. The second one was 18 months of planning, because once you're flying on the world record flight, there's no more planning. So everything had to be tied down. The third one, I was really laid back. I mean, I was going to Europe first, which doesn't require entry from or overflight and entry permits for all the countries. So I was pretty laid back about that. And then just used Bo for getting around Africa and across India. And then once you're in Australia, you don't need any more. So I was a lot more laid back and kind of did the planning as I was going on the third one. Probably not the best way to do it, but I guess I felt I knew enough that I felt comfortable doing it that way on the third one. But otherwise, I mean, for a first trip, it just takes a ton of planning.
I couldn't even imagine. And permits and all of that, when you had to get those, how far in advance? Like I know Jacqueline had brought up potentially, weeks in advance. Was every one of them completely different on timing?
No, the first trip I gave Bo, I knew where I was going and I had everything tied down to within a couple of days. And most of the permits give you 36 hours, sometimes a little bit more. So you've got a day. I mean, you can work around weather. So Bo got me all the permits for the for the first one, got me all the permits for the second one. So, I mean, yes, I had all the dates worked out well ahead of time so that they could get me, so he could get me the permits. I mean, if I did have a last minute, in fact, something happened in Thailand. I was going to go into Bangkok and then they had, something was going on, whether it was a strike or something, and I had to change to Chiang Mai within the last 2 weeks before the flight. And maybe it was the last month. And he was able to get all those changed. So, I mean,
Wonderful.
you give whoever's getting you the permits as much time as possible, but they can do some, last minute changes with a couple of days or a couple of weeks notice.
That's great.
Congratulations. That was really an awesome talk and great accomplishment.
Thank you. I was lucky enough to be able to do it, and I enjoy sharing the stories.
I agree. Thank you so much for being here, Carolyn. I could listen to you over and over and over again. It's always so exciting.
Well, I'll be able to chat with you and see you in February.
I can't wait.
Looking forward to it.
Me too.
And Caroline, if you ever want to tour the 50th Special Operations Wing with our airplanes and stuff, just give me a call.
I will. Thank you.
Take you out there and let
Jacqueline?
you see those birds.
Jacqueline, I hope you can give me Alex's information and some of the other people's as well. When you were talking earlier, I was going to say I'm working with the airport manager in Moriarty, and the Moriarty High School is trying to do the AOPA high school curriculum for people.
We're very familiar with that effort.
Yeah. Oh, you're already working with them on it?
So I'm on the board at SAMS Academy that's about to become an Albuquerque Aviation Academy, and our lead instructor has been talking with the folks out there in Moriarty.
Okay,
Because
great.
they contacted us because we already have a flight program.
Right. I know you guys have one, so they're trying to do the AOPA one because everything's kind of organized for them.
Yeah, and we had built ours before that came along, so there's elements of it, but it's a great piece of curriculum.
So is it Moriarty going to use yours now or the AOPA one?
We haven't talked since midsummer, so I'm
Oh,
not going to speak for what their final decision was.
Okay. Anyway, I think it's great for the local kids, and we've got the airport right next door, and we can help them. And
Right, which dovetails directly into what I'm talking about in the Roundhouse here on at least 2 occasions. I want our children in New Mexico to be able to use that New Mexico lottery to gain their advanced tickets.
right. I think it'll be great for the kids there in Moriarty, and we're right there, right next door.
Yep. We have to find a public institution that will stand up a program, and then we have to find a way for that program to have aircraft, and that's the biggest challenge.
Oh, okay.
That's
Okay.
why it failed. That's why it failed before. It was cost prohibitive for the state, and they have no appetite for it.
No. Well, hopefully we can work together on that.
That'd be great.
Well, I just sent the 2 of you an email to connect you. So you've got each other's info now.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jack.
Dan, it looked like you were about to speak up.
I chatted with Bob Hudson at the museum earlier this week, And he is going to be talking with the AOPA point of contact for their STEM program in the very near future. So
Great.
wheels are turning.
Great.
Which
Thanks for the-
museum?
Oh, the Southwest Soaring Museum.
Okay, thank you. There's a lot of museums, so.
Right. Yeah, thanks for the update, Dan. Glad to hear it. I'll be back there next month.
Yeah, hopefully we'll be doing a lot more with STEM for the elementary and mid level grades.
Okay, well, the AOPA program is just for high school, on 9th through 12th.
Exactly. I've taken a look at it. As Alex said, it's very comprehensive.
It is.
Well, wonderful. This has been such good discussion. Caroline, it has been so wonderful to have you. I just want to give one last opportunity for questions if anybody has them. Otherwise, we're going to roll out of here. So any other burning questions that you'd like to ask Caroline before we dismiss for the evening? All right. Well, again, thank you so much, Carol Ann. I really look forward to reading the books. If anybody would like the books, I put her email address into the chat. So please hop on there, copy it down so that you can order the books directly through her so that the proceeds can go to the ALS research. I appreciate you so much coming tonight, Carol Ann, and sharing your story with us. It was wonderful. It was riveting. And now you've got me like wanting to go on a world, circumnavigate the world. Yeah. All right, Alex, let's do this.
Let's go. I got a 17-year-old that's got to build hours.
Yeah. I mean,
Oh, there you go.
just got to ask American for some time off. So, but I'm very inspired now. Thank you so much. And just to recap, for those who weren't here earlier, in a week, we have another virtual guest speaker, Michelle Mace-Curran, who is the lead solo pilot for the Thunderbirds, very accomplished pilot. She's going to be speaking to us about her time with the Thunderbirds. And then in February, right now, I mean, we're working on a couple of things, but I'm going to be speaking at the WAI conference, and we're going to try to Zoom that for anybody who cannot attend but wants to see my presentation. And then in March, we're working something through Katie Wesley with Virgin Galactic. So that's just kind of what's on the horizon. But once again, thank you so much, Carol Ann. And I'll leave the room open just for a couple minutes if anybody has some last minute questions. But otherwise, I hope you all have a wonderful evening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Hey, Daisy.
Bye.
Oh, and Daisy, don't go away. Did she hop off? Oh, she totally hopped off. I was gonna, because she wasn't on here, Caroline, when we were talking about glider flying, and she's the one who I told you was just starting to take lessons. So I was gonna have you preach to her about glider flying.
I can do that.
Oh, she's gone now, but
I couldn't get Gabriel to do it either. Like, no, I like things with motors, but I love gliders.
they're
The cat,
so much
that was
fun,
awesome.
and they make you
So
such a
much.
good pilot.
Absolutely.
Energy management.
Yep. That's it.
That I feel like is one of the hardest people to wrap their brains around. Like, by no means do I know more than anybody that I fly with. I know that I still have a ton to learn, but I think one of the things people struggle with the most, because I fly the Airbus, is energy management. And that shocks me that I am at this level in my professional career, and there are people who still don't seem to understand that. And I feel like it was beat into my brain very early because of flying gliders.
Our Air Force pilot training graduates, we are retraining them right now because they're not getting it in pilot training. Just basic energy management. I'm fortunate I've got a HUD with an energy queue in it. We're going back to basics.
Wow.
So
I mean, that's what you got to do.
yeah. Stuff we used to do in a glider. Hey, you're gonna land. You might want to make sure you land where you want to.
I mean, you're going down one way or another. What goes up must
Yes.
come down. And in this case, you don't have power to salvage a bad landing. You've got to plan ahead and make it work. And yeah, that's kind of what shocks me a lot of the time, is that, I'm like, at this point in my professional career, I sort of expected more, and I'm a little bit disappointed.
Depends on what you started in.
Right.
What you got.
Absolutely. So.
All right. I think it's my night to cook dinner, so I should probably go. Thank you so much. It was a
I-
pleasure meeting you. I
Enjoyed
look
it.
forward to more.
Thanks for
Bye.
coming, Alex. It's so
Me
good
too.
see
Thanks
you.
so much, guys.
Take care.
Alexis, thank you so much for coordinating this. I really appreciate it. This has been wonderful.
Absolutely. Happy to do it. And thank you so much again, Carolyn. I'm so glad that you were able to do it. And I know you've got a super busy schedule, but I think you inspired a lot of people like you always do.
Well, thank you. I'll see you in next.
Sounds great. I'll shoot you an email.
Great. Have a
Bye.
good night, everybody.
Thanks.
Night.
Thank you for facilitating, Jacqueline.
Yep,
Happy
Thanks,
to.
Jacqueline. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.